Hello, and welcome to Chagpar MD. I'm Dr. Anise Chagpar, and this week I have a very special guest. Candice Price is a breast cancer survivor. Now, a lot of you have asked me to cover topics in oncology, and many of you have taken my course, An Introduction to Breast Cancer on Coursera. But maybe you want to know a little bit more about breast cancer from a breast cancer survivor's point of view. Maybe you're going through this journey yourself, or maybe you're helping someone else to. Maybe you're in the healthcare professions and are wondering what it really feels like on the other side. Or maybe you're an aspiring student who just wants some inspiration to really continue in your field of endeavor. No matter what it is, I am sure that this interview is going to be inspiring and informative. So what do you say? Let's get started. Hi, Candice. So happy to have you here as my guest.
Hi, very good to be here. Thank you.
So, Candice, maybe we could start by you telling us a little bit about your story. Start with, once upon a time I was perfectly well, and then.
So, once upon a time, I was perfectly well. I had just turned 28 years old. I was planning my first ever cruise to the Caribbean with my mom for her birthday. Um, and I think the first time I noticed anything that gave me a little bit of pause was about June of 2017. And I was just in the shower, doing the normal to-dos. And I was like, oh, what's this? Didn't think much of it. I am at the time that I noticed it 27.
Yeah.
I have no family history of cancer at all. And I don't even really know how to do breast exams properly. I remember my gynecologist telling me something about like bicycle spokes, and I'm like, yeah. And so when I noticed the lump, I said to myself, well, let me just tell my doctor the next time I'm in there. And so the next time I needed to see her was about August. And I was like, hey, I feel something, different in my breast here. I was following up on something else and asked her, could you tell me if this is the same as it was before? Because I know I've been told I have lumpy breast
Yeah.
tissue, dense breast tissue, and I'm not sure. And she gave me the best advice ever, which was, if it was something enough to give you a concern, let's go check it out. So still no red flags are raised for me. She gave me a prescription to go have an ultrasound. And then the ultrasound tech was like, let me just show my boss, my radiologist, and they'll, give a second opinion. I'm like, okay, still no alarm bells going off. And, he came in and he was like, well, I'm not sure what this is, but it's definitely going to need to come out. And then my favorite phrase, which is, rung through most of my cancer journey, is, but you're too young for cancer, so it's probably not that. And I'm like, okay, I am too young for cancer. Thank you. Um, and so, my doctors recommended a biopsy, and I said, sure. The first available time was after I got back from my cruise, and I said, perfect, because I'm not canceling my cruise. My mom had calcification in the breast, and so I just said, that's probably the same thing. You get what your mom gets, right? And so, my boyfriend at the time was very upset with me. He told me that I need to cancel my cruise and go get the biopsy. And I said, no way, I have a cruise planned. And so, and I am very grateful for the fact that I did go on my cruise, because
Yep.
after I got back and was diagnosed, everything went into light speed and there was no time for cruising. And so I was really, really happy that I had the time away, not thinking about it at all. So when I got back, I had the biopsy and still not thinking anything of it. I was at work and I got a phone call about 10 in the morning, and it was my soon to be breast surgeon, and I wasn't thinking anything of it. They were like, "Hi, is this Candice?" I said, "Yes." And I'm walking away to like a private room to have the conversation. And before I could even get into the room, she said, "Hi, your results came back and you have breast cancer and we're going to need you to come in." And I was like, "Excuse me, what?"
I can imagine.
I'm surprised I didn't say, "No, I don't." I was just in complete shock because I know that, of course you should weigh the possibilities. Anything can happen when you're waiting for results, but it was not, I knew I didn't have anything. And so that was a complete shock for me. Um, I've had zero language in my lexicon about cancer, for cancer. The only thing I knew about cancer I'd seen, depicted in TV and movies, and it was never anything good. It was always death follows immediately after the diagnosis, and you're coughing up blood or whatever. All that I could see was not scary. It was all very, very scary. And so that's how I got here, you know. Um,
Unbelievable.
yeah,
So a few things. I mean, I guess the first thing is, um, you know, even though you were young and even though you had no family history, um, you can still be diagnosed. And I think that that is so critical for people to realize. And the thing is that you did the right thing. You felt something, it didn't feel right, you went to your doctor.
yes, and that's something I tell my friends, anybody's like that I overhear. I'm like, definitely go speak to your doctor as soon as possible. Like, don't wait.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's
But
so important.
yeah, it is. But I too am glad that you went on your cruise. I tell people, we we take care of cancer so that you can live your life. Don't stop living your life. Um, you know, and have those conversations with your doctor, right? So let's suppose, you know, you could have had the conversation that said, can I go on this cruise? And my bet is they would have said yes. We're going to do a bunch of tests, go on your cruise. When you come back, we'll have all of this done, and then we'll move forward. Like, but don't deny yourself life, because I think for so many patients, that diagnosis is so scary in and of itself. Now, for a lot of breast cancers, and we'll get into this in a minute, the prognosis is really pretty good. But for some, as you say, as Hollywood has kind of depicted it, it can cut life short. And so, one of the lessons that I think so many of my breast cancer patients have taught me is you really need to suck the marrow out of life. I mean, you've got a limited journey here. Uh, and, whether you've been diagnosed or whether you haven't, like, live life, right? Suck the marrow out of life.
Absolutely.
So you go on your cruise and you come back,
Yes.
and now you're in treatment phase. So what did they tell you about your diagnosis and how you were going to be treated, and what was that like for you? And did you tell your family, and did you have support? And what were the things that were really annoying as you went through this, and what were the things that were really helpful? Because a lot of people want to know. We want to know, like, if a friend's diagnosed, what should we do?
Yeah. So I was diagnosed with stage 3A triple negative breast cancer. In that I had a mass that I think was about 8 centimeters in my right breast, and it had gone into one of my lymph nodes under my arm. And, getting that diagnosis, like I said, I was just like, what? What is
Yeah.
a hormone receptor? What is
I
any
know,
of
right?
this? I thought it
Now I
was
have to
breast
become a
cancer or
mini
no.
mini doc overnight. I have to learn a whole new language.
I
So what was that
absolutely
like?
did.
How did you do that, Candace?
So asking, questions of my doctors while I was there, when I had the wherewithal to ask those questions on Google, um, trying to figure out what different things mean. I would get the lab reports and I'd be like typing in those little letters to find out what's a good score. And thankfully, I did have a lot of wonderful support. So I'll start by saying I'm a very private person. I had a medical event happen to me a couple of years prior, and it was a shock. And so I just wanted to be able to have like a handle on what was going on and understanding a little bit more before I shared with like my broader, audience in terms of like social networks and, extended family and all that. So initially it was just my mom, my boyfriend, and my best friends that knew, and my manager at work. Um, and I just needed to get a handle on things before I shared it out there. And my core support system was so helpful, always willing to come with me to appointments, treatment, everything. I was never ever alone. And having that extra support there was critical for me because the conversation of all of us being confused and not understanding brought out different parts of the conversation that I may not have even thought of, or having someone else there to take notes to look back on and say, oh, okay, that's what he said, because I'm there having conversation, but you know I'm actually like not hearing anything.
I know. And that is
you
so,
know
so important, right? Because there is so much information coming at you so fast, and oftentimes in a foreign language called
yes.
medical terminology, that it's so important to bring somebody with you so that they can take notes and they can be your extra set of ears. And afterwards, you can debrief and they can say, well, they said this. And you can say, but I thought they said that. And then you
Yes.
can kind of make sure that everybody heard the same thing.
Hmm.
And oftentimes they're asking questions for you too that you may not have thought of. So, so, so critical. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then what happened?
So it was a lot of decisions very quickly, that I wasn't really, I hadn't really contemplated, in terms of fertility preservation, um, in terms of, joining a clinical trial or not. And, um, I was also able to connect with my church, and they were wonderful support. So when I first was diagnosed, I went and I was like, I need prayer. And they
Yes,
covered
ma'am.
they literally encircled me and just prayed over me and checked in with me, and it was amazing. And through my church network, I was able to connect with another group of survivors who, some were actually advocates. They were working with different cancer networks, and also just very encouraging to me about the benefits of participating in a clinical trial, because once again, I didn't know what was the right way to go or not. So, my one friend, Nicole, she said, it's very important for especially women of color to participate in clinical trials because there's not a whole lot of data about how different treatments will affect us, and it does affect us differently. And so, putting that bug in my ear was really, really beneficial for me to help me sort of process and think about things as I went along my journey, talking to God, like, what do I do? So when it came down to my treatment plan, we did decide to engage in a clinical trial. So I did a neoadjuvant double-blind trial with pembrolizumab, and they call it Keytruda on the
Yep.
commercials. And so my plan was to first do chemo, dose dense, and kind of flip the normal because of my trial. So I had carboplatin and Taxol first, and every 3 weeks I would have the blind drug intravenously, and then I would have the adriamycin cytoxin on the second half. After that, I did a lumpectomy. They also had done an excisional biopsy on the left breast because there was something a little bit weird looking when they were doing the diagnostic at the outset. And then at the end, I did my radiation. And So there was no clinical trial drugs during the lumpectomy and the recovery for that. But when we went back and just started doing radiation, I was back on every 3 weeks having the trial drug.
So I wanna unpack so many things that are there. So the first is, you really got a lot of strength from your faith, and I think that that is so critical for so many of us. Is really relying on your support networks and on your faith. Um, and different people will kind of take that differently. Some people um, kind of do what you did, which is, I think, really positive in the sense of going and embracing prayer and continuing along your journey with treatment and knowing that that you will make it through. Others, however, take the tack of, um, if God gave me this cancer, then God wants me to die of this cancer. Did that thought ever strike you? Or what would you say to somebody who says that?
So thought never struck me at all. It was more along the lines of God gave me this battle because He knew I'd be able to walk through it or help somebody, from my story. And if my journey was to end shortly, then I did hope that I was a blessing to somebody along the way. And that wasn't anything that I think I necessarily needed to put on. It just I really prayed and I had some, supernatural peace. And that's
Yeah.
what I prayed for. And that's definitely what I received. Thank God.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
think that that is so right. I think God gives us the challenges that He knows that we can endure, and everything happens for a reason. And I really do think, just like the sign above you, that you are blessed and you're a blessing to other people, and really helping share your story is helping other people. And I think the other thing is that God kind of leads your path. So for a lot of patients, they say, I was given this diagnosis, but by the grace of God, I have a team of people who can help me. I have my medical professionals, I have my family, I have my faith and my church group, and they can get me through this. The second thing I really wanted to unpack with you, Candice, was this whole concept of clinical trials, especially in minority populations, because it's true, right? The majority of clinical trials that we have are done primarily on Caucasian people. And historically, there have been some unethical practices regarding clinical trials affecting minority patients that justifiably has enraged people and made them really take pause about participating in clinical trials. Um, but as you say, clinical trials are so fundamental to really gaining that knowledge about, do these treatments work for people who look like me and everybody else for that matter. And we know that people who participate in clinical trials tend to do better than people who don't. So unpack that for me. Was that ever a thought? Did people come to you and say, you know, you don't want to be a human guinea pig, or, have you thought about what has happened in the past with regards to trials in African Americans? You really ought to be cautious. I mean, did those thoughts cross your mind? And what would you say to people who are thinking that now?
so those thoughts definitely did cross my mind. Really enjoy history. And I remember learning about the way that they would just experiment on Black people and, really unethical things going on, testing drugs on Black people to see. And also just the assumption that Black people, especially Black women, have a higher tolerance for pain, and that they could endure more just by virtue of, I don't know, being labeled an other. And so, in my mind, my initial thoughts about clinical trials was, I don't want to be a guinea pig.
Right.
And I also thought, You probably only need to do those extraordinary things if you're like a really, really bad case or something. Um, but, honestly, the conversations that I had with Nicole, she was very, very versed in, treat different types of treatments as well as clinical trials, really encouraged me to not feel as though it was going to be an experiment on my life, that this is, something that's regulated and definitely, not going to be any unethical practices happening. And I have to say, of course, it's a double blind trial, so I am not aware if I was getting the drug. But I would say, and this is not just, me talking crazy, after the first week or two, me and my doctors felt a noticeable difference in my cancer. It was less hard. You could physically feel it shrinking. And so, if there's a chance that there is a treatment that can help me and help somebody else improve their chances and get better results during their treatment, especially, this one was sort of targeted at the triple negative
Yeah.
community that, we don't have any of the maintenance drugs. So I was like, this is something that I think is very, very important to engage in if it gives you the next chance, the next hope that you'll be able to see recovery sooner. I'd say to do it.
Yeah, no, that's so important. It's so important because clinical trials these days, as you say, they are really, really well regulated now. There are multiple layers of regulation and oversight to make sure that none of the unethical practices that happened in the past will ever happen again. Thank God. And the other thing, as you say, is that oftentimes this is the way that you can get tomorrow's treatments today. You can benefit yourself, you can benefit other women going forward, and it's not just late treatment. So I do clinical trials often in early stage disease, and I am so grateful to the women who participate in these clinical trials because to all of you who are out there, you have changed practice. You have made things better. And when we see new treatments and the way that things are happening now being so much different than the way that they were 20 years ago, 40 years ago, like, in the 1960s, Candice, you would have lost your breast and all of the lymph nodes
Um,
survival rates would have been terrible. But, thanks to clinical trials, treatments have come a long way.
yeah, that's amazing. And that was another reason why I wanted to help push the needle forward. I recognize that the type of treatment that I'm receiving is because women before me were willing to take this step, almost like a leap of faith
Yeah,
um, for me.
yeah, that's so, so important. But the other thing is, so you were on chemotherapy, and the types of chemotherapy that you were on almost inevitably would have caused you to lose your hair. But for a lot of African American women, that is a big deal. Did you think about that?
Oh, yeah. I think that's one of the common things that everyone knows about chemotherapy. You're going to go bald. And that was frightening for me. I relaxed my hair for like 12 years, so like the majority of my life. And I didn't know what to do. I sort of started to try to cope with it by getting like a short haircut, so maybe it wasn't going to be as traumatic, but it was a very, very emotional process starting to lose my hair. Um, well, one friend tried to convince me that maybe I wouldn't. She knew somebody that, knew somebody that didn't even lose their hair and they have a lot of hair like you. You'll be, I was like, okay, thank you, but I'm not gonna, I'm not going to put my mind on that. I'm just going to try to, grasp the fact that I'm probably going to lose my hair. And, it was kind of traumatic. I started noticing like when I would run my hands through my hair, hair was coming out, and I just tried to avoid combing completely. And as I said, I was working throughout treatment. So I wasn't at the place where I wanted to tell all of my coworkers yet.
Yeah.
So I went and purchased a wig and started to try to, test that out a little bit before my hair started coming out pretty bad. It did get to the point where I was at work and I was just so self-conscious that it might fall down that I said that night, okay, I need help. And so I just decided to get ahead of it a little bit and, shave it at home. And it was a very emotional
I can imagine.
process. I was happy to lose my hair and my cancer. I don't want to keep my hair and my cancer. um, and throughout the journey, I was actually really able to let go of some of the vanity that I didn't know that I had. I was able to truly feel the beauty that I have is within. It has nothing to do with a single follicle of hair anywhere on my body or not. And it was really wonderful. And I really felt very empowered, being bald. And it's kind of crazy, especially to speak to any woman and say, whatever, hair or no hair, you're fab. And it was so funny, like the world just also embraced me. I would go to the mall, I would go to McDonald's, and people would be like, oh my God, you're so brave, I so want to do that, you look great. Just people I do not know. And it was just like an amazing encouragement that the world just sort of like hugged me as I was going through this as well. So it's tough, it is definitely tough, but in those journeys you find a strength in yourself that you didn't know that you had, and it just unlocks
Yeah.
for you.
That is so powerful. I mean, just and for any African American woman out there, or any woman, period, who is afraid of losing their hair, I think the two sentences that you said that really resonate for me was you didn't want to lose, uh, you didn't want to keep your hair and keep your cancer, uh, and that the beauty is really within. Um, uh, and and your hair grew back,
It did grow back, and
and it
I
looks fab.
thank you. I celebrated every milestone. I remember, so I was wearing wigs for a while, and I got to a point where I was just too hot. I was having hot flashes, and I said, forget the wigs. So I started just being out there with my bald head. And when I started getting peach fuzz, you couldn't tell me anything. I was like, look at me, I have hair. I was like, oh, look, I have a little ponytail. It's probably like, half an inch, but I celebrated every single milestone.
That
And
is
yeah,
awesome.
so it's actually been 2 years since I finished my chemotherapy treatment, and I've got hair. I
Yeah,
feel like I've got a lot of hair. It's growing faster than I think it grew before when I was relaxed, which is pretty interesting.
that's awesome. That's awesome. The other thing that you started to tell us was you had told your manager at work that you were diagnosed, but you didn't want to tell anybody else at work, to kind of keep things private. What was it like having cancer at such a young age and going to work? I mean, what was that dynamic between, you know, did you feel like your employer was really supportive of you? Did you feel like it was kind of uneasy or awkward working while you were trying to go through cancer treatment? What was that like?
So it was actually very smooth for the most part. I had been having a conversation with my manager about a different medical course of action. I had anticipated taking a short leave of absence to do a procedure, excuse me. And then the day that I was diagnosed, my world changed,
Yeah,
and
turned
so
upside down.
upside down. So I went to her office and I was like, um, I just got a call from my doctor and it's not good news. And, um, you know, I'll have to give you more information later. I don't know yet. And she was so encouraging and so sweet. She was like, you should go home, you should. And I was like, no, no, I'm fine. I thought that I could just soldier through it, and I could not. Um, and so she gave me like the best advice in terms of go home, take care of yourself,
Yeah.
you know, mentally, wrap your mind around whatever the news is that you received. And once I was able to get to a place to communicate with her about it, it's probably later that day or the next day, I told her, and she said, do what you need to do. And so it was a lot of midday appointments, and everyone was very, very, very supportive of me. Um, so she also connected. We have some different resources at the company that I work at in terms of like different therapies or anything that you kind of need. They're very willing to help you. They call it employee assistance program. Um, and so it was really, really great great, at first, because I was in a department with people that I really cared about, that cared about me. They're very accommodating to my schedule. And then unfortunately, about 2 months into my chemotherapy treatment, our entire department was laid off.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was kind of effective immediately. We had 3 weeks of a notice period. So it was at the beginning of February that they notified us. And by the end of March, if we didn't have anything, in terms of employment, that would kind of be it. And so while I was already just sort of being in survival mode, going to treatment, coming to work, going to treatment, I then went into a little bit of panic mode because I just barely started chemo. I need chemo. I cannot afford these drugs without my medical insurance.
Right.
And so I I was freaking out. My doctors were connecting me with different resources should I need social services to help me. And my managers were doing the best that they could to try to help all of us, but also specifically me, find something because, she recognized that I know that you need your medical insurance, and so I'm gonna, do whatever I can. She actually connected with a colleague of hers and spoke highly of me. And luckily, within about 2.5 weeks, I was able to get a new position within the company because that was my biggest concern, not having a lapse in coverage. And I didn't want to start over somewhere else where I wouldn't even have short-term disability and all of those very major worries that you shouldn't have to worry about when you're also, doing this kind of treatment. But
Yeah. I mean, it's just, one stress after another.
yeah,
But I'm so glad that you were able to find something else and keep that coverage. But, that's something that a lot of women face is that, the stresses of life continue and cancer doesn't make an appointment on your calendar and check whether this is a good time. Like, are you not going to be stressed out? Let me come then. It just happens to show up. And mysteriously, all kinds of other things happen at the same time. Another thing that a lot of patients notice is that relationships change too. And they either change for the better or they change for the worse. Not necessarily the worse, but really kind of getting this realization of these are really the relationships that are positive and nurturing and solid. And these are relationships that really weren't. And because at times of stress, like a cancer diagnosis, those relationships that really aren't, um, they tend to fizzle because people kind of say, this is too much for me. How did your relationships work throughout this time period?
I think exactly what you said is right. I think, and it was funny, certain relationships that I thought didn't have as much foundation solidified in a way that I wouldn't have expected. Certain people that I thought were scared of everything, showed me strength and support that I was shocked and really relieved by. All other relationships just got even deeper. The compassion got even deeper, and the understanding and just the love just sort of expanded, in
Yeah.
this space. Um, I didn't experience a lot of negative relationships, although there were some areas where I thought that would be the opportunity to come closer, and it didn't get any better. No one reached out from that area, and I would have expected that some things, a hello, how are you, would
Yeah.
have filled the gap. But that's okay, because I do believe that relationships have a season, and if the season had ended, then that's okay. I think that that's for the best, rather than to
Totally.
stay in somebody's life and bring them down. I think
Right.
that would probably be worse.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like how diamonds are formed, right? You take a lump of coal and you put it under pressure, and magically things can happen. Um, the other point I wanted to touch on briefly is that whole concept of fertility preservation. I mean, you were so young. You had a boyfriend. Um, I mean, had you been thinking about having children? I mean, now all of a sudden you're thrown into this. Well, do you want to have kids or do you not want to have kids? Because we kind of need to know now before we start your chemo. And I can imagine what that felt like. So tell us a little bit about that thought process and what that must have been like.
That was crazy. I have always wanted to have a family, uh, but not rushed, I always thought that I would have, time to do that in a natural way and all of these things. So I had met with a fertility specialist, and we talked about my options in terms of egg harvesting. Um, and I was considering it, but I did have this medical event that happened to me a few years prior, and I'll just very briefly say, I had been diagnosed with intrauterine fibroids, and my doctor had given me a very low dose of birth control to try to um, see if that would help. And unfortunately for me, the extra estrogen in that birth control made me have like a blood clot. I had a DVT in my
Oh my
brain.
gosh.
And
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it was wild. So I was very concerned when the fertility specialist said that, having the injections would elevate my estrogen levels naturally so that I could produce more eggs or
Yeah.
embryos.
And you were like, I don't know about this.
I was like, I don't want to create a new problem while trying to solve one, and that is what it came down to. And it was a very, very hard and emotional decision to walk away from that option. But at the time, it was the best decision for me.
Yeah. It's so tough, right? It's so tough because it really is like you're given this diagnosis, you're taken by shock, and then you need to make a bunch of decisions relatively quickly that will have major implications in your life.
Absolutely.
And that must just be so tough.
Is very difficult, and it can at times feel overwhelming, but for me, I really just prayed about it. And it was just sort of a matter of balancing priorities, and trying to figure out the hierarchy of them.
Yeah.
So that's how I did it.
Candice, this conversation has been absolutely incredible, and I can imagine, if there are any young women out there, especially young women of color going through breast cancer, listening to this, it would feel almost like listening to your big sister give you morsels of really, really good advice. So, as our last question, what advice would you give to women, young women of color, or anyone really, going through a breast cancer diagnosis? What are the top things that you would say that are really important for them to remember?
I would say have grace with yourself. It's not going to be an easy journey. Moment to moment may be different, and that's okay. Just take the moment to breathe, think about how you're feeling. If you are a person who likes to journal, write it down. That may be something that is very beneficial for you. And I would highly implore you to write down your thoughts and how you're feeling. And in addition, reach out for help. That was something that I struggled with. Everyone is trying to figure out a way to help and support you. Take them up on that, whether it be helping you clean up around the house, do dishes. There's going to be a lot of times, especially during treatment, where you're fatigued. You can't do everything that you used to do. And it's okay to ask for and receive help and support. Um, in addition, I would just say ask questions. If something doesn't make sense to you, if there's a word that's weird and just ask them to break it down. Your doctors, your medical team, it's your team, right? And that's how I viewed it. This is my medical team. They're here to help me. I'm the star player, and they have their roles to support me. And if I have a question, they have the answers. All you have to do is ask. And
Yeah,
if you don't understand, ask it again and have them break it down.
absolutely. Absolutely. Such great advice. Thank you so much for being my guest here on Check Per MD. I hope all of you out there who are watching this found this as inspirational and educational as I did. I hope that you will like this. I hope that you will share it with somebody who needs to hear this advice. Please leave us a comment down below, and make sure that you take care of yourself. Please do like, share, subscribe. Until next time, this is Dr. Anise Chagpar wishing you all a healthy and safe week.